The topic for today, I chose to have it include this sense of urgency and security that most of us as human beings are at one point or another driven by, or in some extreme cases plagued with. When we talk about life, especially nowadays, it's so difficult for us to not consider the vast array of responsibilities that is upon each of our shoulders, in a sense, in one capacity or another. When we talk about security or sense of urgency, the one story that really comes to mind is one that pretty much exists in all of the traditions in Buddhist practice. And the one that I'm referring to is the simile of the poisoned arrow. When over the years, when you're studying Buddhism, the Dharma, you come across the story in so many different contexts, in so many different ways. And when I was fortunate enough to come across the actual reference to it in the Majjhima Nipata, Pitaka, in the Sutta Pitaka, Majjhima Nikaya, and also it's mentioned also in the Samyutta Nikaya, the numerical discourses. It involves a certain monk. His name was Malunkyaputta, and you come across many names of students, disciples of the Buddha, where the suffix putta is there. Usually it means the son of. And in those days, they went with mentioning not the father, but the mother. For example, Sariputta, the son of Sari, who happens to be the chief disciple of the Buddha, Sariputta, who was second to the Buddha only in his wisdom, in his capacity to delineate, to explore, to explain, and to expand the very short dharmic messages that the Buddha had mentioned earlier, for example. And in this case, it was Malunkyaputta, the son of Malunkya, a certain monk who had joined the order, who hadn't necessarily achieved or attained any level of jhanas or even insight. But he had, we all come to a tradition or a practice or a way of thought with our own baggages, as it were. And today is no different than how it was 2,600 years ago. So he one day is fed up with the Buddha, with the Sangha, with the community of monks. And he's a monk. He's thinking to himself, I joined the order because I wanted my teacher to be spiritually powerful. And what that meant was, basically, he needed to exhibit, he needed to have certain psychic powers that he would show, the teacher would show to his students, to the community. So he was saying, my teacher is not walking on waters, at least, I'm not seeing it. He's not doing this, he's not curing the sick, he's not doing, etc., etc., etc. So he says, you know what, I'm going to bring that to the attention of the Buddha, and I'm going to give him an ultimatum. Yes. And so it is, where he approaches the Buddha and says, teacher, I am thinking of disrobing unless you do give me what I want. And the Buddha says, I'm paraphrasing, of course. He says, what is it that you're requesting? And he says, I want to see that you're able to do certain feats, psychic feats. Be able to go through, fly, go through this wall, that wall, go and walk on water, etc. And after he finishes his long list supernatural abilities that he expects to find in a spiritual teacher, the Buddha turns to him and asks him in such a beautiful way a very simple question. He asks him, and the Buddha had such an interesting way of scolding someone, shaking someone, without necessarily being vulgar about it. He would say something along the lines of, "Oh, silly man." At that point, this monk was not behaving like a monk, like a monastic. And when the Buddha says that, it in itself is quite poignant. And he says, "Oh, silly man, have you ever heard me promising you or anyone else that once you put on the kesa, the robes, once you shave your head and take on the vows of a monk or nun, that I will be promising you a set of psychic performances?" He says, "No, teacher." Then he says, "Why in the world are you coming to me with this ultimatum? If you want to leave, you may go ahead and leave. However, ultimately we need to come back to the fact that the Buddha was, the epitome of compassion." And he turns to him and gives him this simile, the poisoned arrow simile. And by the way, Buddhism or Buddhist teachings have enormous library of similes, which is beautiful. And as teachers, we often end up using quite a number of similes. We use them even in life. Our languages, whatever language we may speak, they nevertheless do contain within them metaphors, similes, etc., which the Buddha used as a medium, as a mechanism, as a tool to drive his point across, to put it into a lovely nutshell, in a way where a person can understand, where the Dhamma can become palatable, understandable, digestible, in fact. So the sutta is called Malunkyaputta Sutta, by the way, in Majjhima Nikaya. And here the Buddha explains of a scenario. He says, imagine, Malunkyaputta, a man is walking in the city. Suddenly, he gets shot by a poisonous arrow in his leg, and he falls. His relatives come rushing in. A surgeon is called in. However, he says, wait, no one touches the wound. I don't want to have anyone pull the arrow out. First, I need to know who shot me. What clan, what class in India at the time, does he belong to? What kind of an arrow was it and a bow that he actually used to shoot me with? Is he, how many siblings does he have? What's their family name? Is he a Brahmin, Kshatriya? What is he, a Sudra? What is he, a merchant class? And the Buddha turns to Malunkyaputta asking, what do you think? Before he ends up finding any of these, the answers to any of these questions, do you think that there's a big chance that he might actually die? And Malunkyaputta turns to him and says, of course, master. The guy's shot with a poisoned arrow. I mean, it's only a matter of, short time before he just dies. And the Buddha turns to Malunkyaputta at this point and says, similarly, you come to me with these series of questions saying, I need to know this. I need to know, is the universe limited or unlimited, limitless? Is it tangible or intangible? Is it finite or infinite? Does the Buddha have special powers or not? Is the soul eternal or not? All these things, one after another, you want to find out before you let me pull the poisonous arrow. And that is enough to keep Malunkyaputta in his robes and to go back and to sit under a tree. And I believe he is mentioned one more time in the suttas. At that point, he's much more evolved as a practitioner. But I never come across him being an arahant, although some might disagree. He might have become an arahant, you know, I hope so. So coming back to the simile of the poison arrow. The description of the arrow itself is taking us back to the first and especially the second noble truth of the four noble truths. The first is the fact that there is suffering. The suffering, you know, the Buddha wasn't saying, by the way, you know, some people claim that Buddhism is such a pessimistic tradition, this and that, and nothing could be further from the truth. Buddhism talks about there is suffering, there being suffering. It does not denying the fact that life is difficult. But it's also not holding itself back from explaining to us as to its causes. No one escapes suffering. Not even the Buddha, as a Buddha. Even until his last days, he was really in pain with his back pain as a result of, you know, past karma, etc., and just the fact that he had old age to deal with. So, once the first suffering is delineated, the first noble truth, rather, is delineated, the second noble truth is the fact that there is ignorance and therefore craving. So, in this simile, the Buddha is talking about the arrow being none other than craving. Craving for what? You name it. Just on the way here, our senses came across so many different things. The biggest of which happens to be the mind. In Buddhist tradition, we have 6 sense organs. 6 sense objects. We have 6 external, 6 internal objects. The things, the thoughts, for example, and the mental capacity is a sense organ within Buddhist tradition. That's how it's explained, in addition to the 5 senses. Now, the craving that one has is something that comes into view, comes into reality, in a sense, reality of experience, the moment we start identifying ourselves with the identity of this is me, this is who I am. I like things, I don't like things. I hate things, I love things. Those both are the 2 faces of the same coin, per se. And that is talking about the poison, which means the ignorance of understanding that there is a conditioned nature to things. There is no identification, ultimately. And that's why we have this non-self or non-personality or non-substantiality principle in Buddhism. Buddhism doesn't say there is no, you know, self or something like that, even though that's how it is represented. What it's talking about is the non-substantiality of things. This is mine. This is mine. No one touches it. These are my dreams. This is my house. And if anyone touches them, I feel threatened. So I want to hold on to those things. So based on that idea of this belonging to me, the personhood, there develops the craving. The reason why we have the sense of identity, or this sense of selfhood, rather, or substantialness of substantiality, sometimes we make words because these are difficult principles that we have to, he's gone up, these are difficult principles that we have to somehow manage to put into the limited capacity of words. And sometimes the words or the vocabulary that we have in our disposal are not enough. So, coming back to the person who's shot with the poison arrow, oftentimes we ignore the fact that we are living in an unsafe world, insecure world, and we want to have some type of sense of security where we hold on to things. It is a sense of maturity that is required in order for us to bring about the sense of not me, not mine, not myself. In the Dhamma or the Dhammic practice, we do not, beat this into the student. Yeah, we can repeat it again and again and again. However, there's a sense of maturity that is required for the brain, for the mind to take this understanding and comprehension into full view, to get a 360 view of things. This is a difficult topic, by the way, and oftentimes I've seen people avoid discussing it or talking about it. However, if there's any bits or areas that are not that clear, please, you can just raise your hand and I'll try to elaborate those instead of waiting for the end of the talk. Okay, we have the person who's in pain, who's experiencing dukkha, the person who's shot with the poison arrow. And then we have the arrow, which we've established it to be craving, which is tinged, dipped in the poison of ignorance. Now the question arises as to, okay, bring it back to the body. Let's bring it back to the experience of living. So where does the poison itself in my day-to-day life lie? Where can I find it? And it has to do with one's own misconception, misunderstanding of how things work. Okay, there's a noise outside. Earlier the cat was walking around, he's enjoying the vista and the rooms, and there's therefore information coming in to our sensory perception. So it's coming in, information. That's an external object. We have no control over that. Now, the internal sixth sense spaces are the poison. In other words, how we've perceived the cat walking around, if we had the thought of, oh, come on, we're having a nice little, talk here, and now my concentration is thrown off. Or it could be something a lot, I found it very pleasant, for example, but let's say there's a noise, an explosion, something happens, unpleasant things happen, or you can stub your toe, for example. That's an external object you just hit. Now, the internal object of that, the corresponding recipient portion of the perception itself, and how we interpret it, that is the poison. If you say, oh, and you start cussing it out, and you start getting angry, for example, getting angry at things, or being attached to the thing. Oh, I have never tasted that flavored ice cream. That's incredible. I want to go back there again and again, and taste it again and again. It is not the ice cream's fault. It is not the pebble or the rock that we stubbed our toe to or at. It is not even the cat. It is how we are behaving as a response to it. That is the poisonous part. of the arrow, of the man being shot with it. The Buddha was quite an incredible person when it comes to teaching such difficult principles. And for that reason, he is also, within the tradition, is also called the ultimate medicine man. And in this example, remember in the simile where the person is shot with the poison arrow, there's a surgeon who comes in and tries to pull it out, the arrow, from the person's leg. That surgeon in this simile happens to be the Buddha. However, unless Malunkyaputta says, please, go ahead, pull it out, that's not going to happen. However, when that does take place, the Buddha is going to pull it out. He's going to need to cut it open, the wound, and flush out with the clear, fresh water of wisdom, of the Four Noble Truths, in order for Malunkyaputta to come to understand the differences between experiencing the world as it is, which is the hardest part of living and practicing this path. When we talk about meditation, it is inseparable from living a decent life. It is inseparable from living a virtuous life. It is inseparable from living a holy life, in a sense. There's Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Sila meaning the virtue or the principles, precepts, things to abide by while we're living. Samadhi is the mental cultivation, which brings about wisdom. That is not reserved for a practitioner necessarily in a deep retreat somewhere in a cave or a hut. It is not reserved for a monk or a nun. It is not reserved for any specific type of a uniquely segregated person, let's say, based on their choices. It is all of our lots, in a sense. It is our own right to live in such a way. And for that reason, the biggest part of the Buddhist community at the time of the Buddha happened to be laity. They were not the monastics. And oddly enough, the biggest group of highly advanced meditators, other than the Arahants, of course, happened to be the laity. You had women and men in different parts of society, different, classes of society, whether they were workers, whether they were royalty, who had reached highest levels of meditation. And the biggest number happened to be within the lay community. Now, these principles that we talked about, whether it's the poisoned arrow, whether it's, the Four Noble Truths, etc., these were understood, but mostly they were practiced. I sometimes see people just focusing on, well, I read a few books and I should be fine. I'm never going to be actually enlightened, per se, maybe in a different lifetime, but not in this one. I've heard Buddhists say this. And they think that the only way that they can truly practice is by becoming a nun or a monk, or going away from society. And that is not a healthy way of looking at the Dhamma. It makes it so exclusionary. And it is not. It's a wonderful tool for all of us. It does not matter what area of society we're in, as long as we're actually able to bring in the mindfulness. And that is that element of wisdom that I mentioned, where the Buddha as a surgeon comes in and cuts open the wound and allowing it, the craving, to spew out, the pus and all that to come out, and for us to be mindful of things. So mindful, in essence, has the ability, has the power to curb all kinds of craving. Because there might be the temptation that we might want some external force like the surgeon, the Buddha, something like outside of ourselves to come in and do some miraculous feat. Again, we fall into the same category as Malinkya-Putta, expecting the Buddha to be doing something, and that's never going to happen. This is a personal path. I wouldn't say lonely path, but it is a very personal path. In this culture, we talk about individuality a lot. And it's amazing because, you know, within the recent decades, we've noticed how many people have gravitated towards the Dhamma. No surprise, especially in the West. Because there's this sense of bringing the attention and responsibility upon our own shoulders, which brings us back to the earlier mention of urgency. The sense of urgency is inseparable from that moment where we're shot, when we realize we're shot with a poison arrow. In reality, we don't know of anyone who would be shot and say, "Don't touch me, I want to know who shot me. I want to know this, this, and this." In reality, we don't see that. We don't witness that outside of ourselves. However, when it comes to us and how we live our lives, it's amazing how we delay the pulling out of, or at least coming to grips with, an understanding and realization of, oops, there's an arrow. I have craving. Oftentimes we're on automatic pilot, and what the Buddha is trying to say is bring that spotlight of awareness into your own living experience. And the moment we do that, craving, much like the darkness in a room that completely vanishes when you turn on the switch, the light bulb goes on, all of a sudden, gone. There's no darkness. And it starts with many snippets, many moments of awareness throughout our days that makes all the difference. The difference between an enlightened person and a regular person, a puthujjana, an uneducated worldling, as some commentators have called them, just an ordinary person who has no idea of the Dhamma, about the Dhamma, practice, etc., is the fact that the enlightened person does not let any moment slip by, one, without having the spotlight of mindfulness on it. That doesn't mean that there's judgment. It's just the mindfulness. Light bulb is always on it. Whatever it is that's coming through the sensory organs, through the 6 sense doors. And the Buddha said in his life, in life we all have 2 arrows that we have to deal with. The enlightened person is the one person who will get rid of one of those for sure. The poison arrow is gone. When we are enlightened, we do not experience that clinging or craving which is based on ignorance. The mind is no longer perturbed by whatever comes in through the sensory sphere. However, we still have to deal with the other arrow, and that is inevitable. And that arrow is this thing called the physical body. Even the Buddha had to experience the body and the frailties of it, old age, sickness, and death. No one can escape that. However, the effects of the body as it loses as it atrophies, as it starts to die, and the consequential elements that come into play as a response to that. There's a lot of people who have Alzheimer's. I come across at least once a week of a person, I hear about at least, who has signs of dementia. You can just imagine, try to imagine the havoc around this person's life. That's also part of that second arrow, which is unavoidable. It has to do with the body. So the Buddha tried for his 45 years of work in teaching people to help us get rid of the first arrow. And once that is taken care of, the second one will not matter. So how are we with time, Bhante? We still have time, huh? Or
another 5 minutes more.
Okay. Any questions so far? There's, again, as so many similes in presented in the Dhamma, in the suttas, and not just the suttas, in the other Pitakas as well. And the other one that I want to share with you is, although that deserves a total different Dhamma talk on it, has to do with the 4 mice. And I recently came across this simile. It's a beautiful simile that the Buddha used. He says, there are 4 kinds of mice in this world. There's the mouse that digs the hole, but never lives in it. There's the second kind of mouse that goes and lives in a hole that was dug up by another mouse. And there's a third kind of mouse that neither digs up a hole nor lives in one. And there's the fourth kind, which goes ahead and digs up a hole and lives in it. When students ask the Buddha as to what the significance of this simile is and how does it relate with the Dhamma, he says, the first mouse is that person who gets he has or she has the tremendous interest in discovering and understanding the Dhamma. So they start the journey. They might study for decades, but they never truly understand. They never truly grasp the Four Noble Truths, for example, the 12 links of causal relations. They never sit down and even meditate. They never have experienced a sitting or even a moment of mindfulness. But they have this intense desire to understand the Dhamma. The second type of mouse or practitioner is a person who just hears something, hears a statement, and just says, okay, I'm just going to base it off of what you're saying, and I'm just going to go on faith in a sense and practice. And they practice diligently. So it works for them. However, when they go about to try to explain it to someone else, they're clueless. That is like the second mouse who went into another's dug up hole. They never actually went through the process of understanding and really elaborating it for themselves. The third kind of mouse happens to be the putujana, the worldling, the common worldling in a sense, who's just lost in the pleasures, gaining more and more pleasures, and conversely pushing away anything that is negative to their sensory of perception of pleasant things. I want more of the good things. So basically they're shunning, pushing away, hating anything that is non-desirable. So that person is truly in danger because they're neither digging up a hole to understand what's going on beyond what's visible to the 6 senses, nor are they going and really relying on someone else's practice or discoveries in a sense, like the second mouse. So they're really out there. And when the moment of death comes, that's one of the worst places to be, according to the Dhamma, because that person is truly lost. Because once we die as human beings, oftentimes most of us take it for granted that we are here and it's like our privilege and it's this and that and we earned it, but we never actually end up oftentimes considering, okay, how am I really making the most of this existence as far as what's coming next? So the principle of rebirth is crucial to the path. Unlike some teachers that I've heard and seen that, and they call themselves Buddhist teachers, unfortunately, by advocating this principle of no, it was a cultural thing. The rebirth has nothing to do with the Buddha's teaching, and if the Buddha was here today explaining the Dhamma, he would not include rebirth, and it's just mind-bogglingly erroneous. And I'm sad to hear that kind of statements, because it takes away the sense of responsibility to the future. We are concerned about what we will do, in a sense. We have at least given it a thought when we leave the Dhamma hall today. It's no different with life as we exit this life. So this third mouse has no idea and concept of it. And then there's the fourth mouse. The fourth mouse happens to be the person who goes in studying the Dhamma, practicing the Dhamma, and living in it. It's unavoidably their life. They've made it their own, in a sense. And they can talk about it. They can share the Dhamma. And the Buddha, obviously, you can guess, he wanted us to be the fourth kind of mouse. So I wanted to share that as well. So there is that sense of urgency that comes in with the practice of the path. So thank you for listening. Are there any questions? Yes?
What exactly do you mean by the practice of the path?
What do I mean by the practice of the path?
Like, what am I supposed to go practice when I leave here today?
Today, that's a very succinct, very practical question. And I will try to give you a tool that you can apply. Whatever you are experiencing, just try to see the experience as is, without adding your own filter, without adding your own interpretation of things, at least in the beginning. And notice, the next step of that is at least notice. Right now, do you see my hand? Did it take any effort from you to see it? Did you add more concepts to it? Oh, the hand is small, the hand is big, the hand is white, the hand is dark. No, you just saw it. That is a pure moment of living as far as this path goes, because we did not add any of our own colorings and flavorings to it. You just saw it. And that is truthful living, in a sense. So if we can just maintain that sense of awareness. Now, having said that, the first of the Eightfold Path has to always be there with us, which is right view. Having the right understanding is so important. But firstly, the right view. So you asking that very poignant question establishes you, at least in the beginning stages, in right view, which is enormously important. Now, how often can you bring your attention to that mindset which allowed you to ask that question? Okay, how can I actually carry myself out and be on the path? Can you maintain that type of questioning in your mind throughout the day? That is right view. Because even in interpreting or translating the Eightfold Path, the word right, which is about 150 years old, sometimes it's so off-putting, because what's right for me might not be right for you. So some of my teachers have called it harmonious understanding or harmonious perspective, something that is appropriate to the context and conditions that you are in. Will it cause anyone any harm in any way, now or later? That is appropriate, that is harmonious, because you're going with whatever is dictated by that moment, yet holding yourself accountable, aware. And that is the essence of mindfulness, because we don't want mindfulness just to be there, because you and I and that cat walking down the street, if a car passes us by, all three of us, including the cat, will be mindful of that. But there's no wisdom there for the cat. So which of us will have that mindfulness transfer itself into wisdom? The more we, and the more often we practice the mindfulness, we will start seeing the craving come in. We start seeing how, I like this. Oh, I hate that. You start seeing that all of a sudden, and then you realize that when I did that, there was absolutely no reason for you to be liking it or not liking it. It wasn't tinged, colored by any of those poisons. So how often can we practice that? And it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, if it does, wonderful. It has happened with students of the Buddha very quickly. One of them was Bahia, and he was the most foremost in attaining with the shortest sentence the Buddha had ever given in all of the suttas, in all Dhamma history of the time of the Buddha. The Buddha pretty much gave exactly what I was trying to say to you. When Bahia came begging him for the Dhamma, the Buddha 3 times denied him. He said, Bahia, this is not an appropriate time. And Bahia finally made his last request, his last plea, and he said, Master, what guarantees do I have that I will still be alive when you are done with your alms rounds, and when you go and sit and eat, and afterwards when you give me the Dhamma, who knows whether I will be alive or not? At that point, the Buddha turned to him and said, Bahia, when seeing, just see. When tasting, just taste. When experiencing, just experience. Exactly what we tried to do. How many of us do that? And guess what? Bahia got it immediately. And interestingly enough, he bowed down to the Buddha. The Buddha went on his alms round. And at that moment, a mother cow with her horns came in and slashed him into, put holes in his body and died. Bahia died. And then the monks said, oh, what are we going to do with that monk? And the Buddha said, you need to make a relic for my son. And when the Buddha said, this is my son or my daughter, it automatically meant that that person was an arahant. So he died an arahant, just from that. So please don't take that lightly. That's such a powerful teaching from the Buddha, because others have done it. Just listening to it, and they got it. It's so simple, but it's so not easy. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Any others? Thank you.